March 19, 2003. Paul and the rest of Bravo Company, as part of the lead company in support of the task force's infantry, crossed the border into Iraq. 48 grueling hours later, they were 300 miles closer to their objective. In the early hours of April 4th, they reached the outskirts of Baghdad.
And at that time, I think everybody was pretty tired because we hadn't slept in quite a while. We got a few hours of sleep, and then they told us to pack up, we're moving in. So we pulled into the airport just as it was getting daylight, and I remember not being able to see the sky. I thought a big storm was coming in, and from time to time you'll see RPGs just flying through the air. You couldn't really tell where any of it was coming from. I just kind of had a feeling we were in the middle of something that just hadn't hit us yet.
As the morning progressed, Paul received word that an area was needed to hold enemy prisoners of war, or EPWs. He directed his soldiers to begin setting up a holding area here in this courtyard.
Sergeant Smith was left in charge, so he ordered us to make a small perimeter in this place. We're setting up the EPW camp just right off of the road that led into the airport.
Myself and my driver, I stayed on my machine gun, the driver stayed in the vehicle in case we had to move it, and all of the soldiers from my squad dismounted out to help Sergeant Smith build this enclosure with concertina wire.
And then I heard over the radio that there had been troops spotted on the enemy side of the wall, 50 to 100. So at that time I moved back up to where the wall entrance was at with my squad, and Bradley pulled through there. So I started running along the side of the Bradley with Sergeant Smith. The Bradley knocked a hole in the wall. Sergeant Smith ran beside me, and he kind of put himself in front of me and went to the enemy side, and we saw enemy troops dropping into fighting position, so we automatically opened fire on them.
And that's when Sergeant Burwald brought his track up to help give more fire. And he was up there, 50K was going crazy.
I began trying to fire at the enemy, but the wall was a little bit higher than I could fire over it. I wound up firing through the wall in the courtyard. And that's when I made the decision to have my driver drive up into the opening in the courtyard directly behind this Bradley fighting vehicle.
And during that whole time, it just got real hectic. A lot of firing, a lot of fires were going on. You could see RPGs streaming about 20, 30 feet over your head.
Then Sergeant Burwald's vehicle was hit by a mortar round.
Looked at my hand, blood pouring off my hand. I guess you could say I was somewhat concussed. The explosives, the mortar round detonated about 1.5 feet from me. And by some miracle, I wasn't killed.
My squad was stacked actually on the side of his track at the time. And when it blew up, it knocked all of us backwards. And we instantly ran to the back and tried to help the people that was in the track get out and performed Buddy 8 on a couple of them.
While Sergeant Burwald and the other injured soldiers were evacuated from the area, Sergeant Smith directed Michael Seaman, then a new private on his first tour of duty in the Army, to move the now unmanned M113 armored personnel carrier into a better defensive position.
That's when I jumped up in the driver's hatch, and he was ground guiding me backwards. And all I could remember thinking was, don't mess up, don't turn the wrong way. And then he put me into position, and told me to get some ammo out and ready to load up. And he just started shooting.
So I ran to the Bradley, which moved out to the Highway 8, and I asked him why they pulled out of there. And he didn't give me an answer off top. He just said someone else was coming in there. So I ran back to the area where Sergeant Smith was, and he was firing his 50 cal. So I yelled to him to come out of there. But there was a large force out there, and he wasn't about to leave his position. He kind of gave me a cutthroat that he's not going to come down.
Every time he got low, he'd holler for me, and I'd already had 50 cal ammo up sitting on top. So I'd link them together, and every time it was more linked, he just told me to get back down the driver's hatch and keep my head down. You could hear rounds tinking off the front of the track and stuff. And that's when he took the shot. I remember thinking, oh great, what do I do now? Because I was still a new private. I didn't it was a scary situation to me. So I knew I had to get out and get to the back of the track where there was cover. So when I jumped out, I rolled down the front of the track and fell on the ground, and I started yelling, "Sergeant Smith's hit, Sergeant Smith's hit."
So I opened up the back of the door, and I saw that he was hit and he wasn't moving. And First Sergeant Campbell at that time came up and saw the same thing, so he closed the door and he ordered a soldier to get into the driver's hatch and pull it out, and then they began the evacuation of Sergeant Smith, and I continued to fight to the end of the battle with my soldiers.
Once the fighting stopped, the soldiers had time to reflect on what had happened.
When he was backing me up, I remember looking at him, and just the way his eyes and his face looked, you could tell that he was pretty concerned. I've never seen that look in his eyes before. It looked like glassed over. It looked like he was nervous, but still knew what he was doing. And his two front teeth, one of them had a chip in it. And I remember thinking that I didn't remember if it was like that before that time or not.
It's a lot different than what I thought it would be. You don't, before you even go, you don't know how you're going to react under fire. You don't know if your training really will kick in like the NCO say it was. It's something that you don't know until you actually experience for yourself. We trained so much, and Sergeant Smith trained us so much that it just kind of became an instinct on what to do.
Statements detailing the battle were given by all the soldiers involved.
I seen the enemy force out there, and there's no doubt in my mind if he hadn't stayed on that 50 cal, they would have came through our position. They may not have overtook our position, but we more than likely would have lost a lot of soldiers.
And it wasn't long before the thought of a Medal of Honor crossed Paul's commanders' minds.
From the body of those statements and the knowledge of the story outside the statements, you could weave together that something a little bit out of the ordinary had happened here in terms of the level of valor or the selflessness that occurred.
After reviewing all the facts, the colonel nominated Sergeant First Class Smith for the nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. Meanwhile, the Smith family struggled with news of Paul's death. It was made even more difficult when an unsent letter to his parents was discovered on his laptop computer.
We didn't get that till quite a bit later, after he had been killed. And
that pretty much summed it up, though, what he had said in the letter. That after we read that, I said he knew something was going to happen. He probably had that feeling, you know.
as I sit here getting ready to head into war once again, I realize that I have left some things unsaid. I love you, and I don't want you to worry. There are two ways to come home: stepping off the plane and being carried off the plane. It doesn't matter how I come home, because I am prepared to give all that I am to ensure that all my boys make it home.
The Medal of Honor nomination package contained minute-by-minute details of the battle, and a copy of the package was eventually provided to Paul's family. Knowing so much about what took place was overwhelming for Paul's mother.
I was there with him. I felt his determination, his tenacity. I could see that look on his face that said, I'm going to win this one. You know, I felt the bullet when he was killed. They say information is good. Sometimes too much information is not good. Because I was there, and I felt it.
Birgit also struggled with her grief.
A year after, I decided to get headstone for Paul, and it is placed in the backyard under my bedroom window, with his face facing the same side where he would sleep in my bed, so that I'm not alone.
Finally, on March 29, 2005, the White House announced its decision. The President of the United States would award Sergeant First Class Paul R. Smith the Medal of Honor.
There was like a big burden taken off my heart, because what I wanted was that Paul, you know, will be a part of history and that his name lives on. And we achieved that with the Medal of Honor.
When Recon continues, honors bestowed at the White House and Pentagon.